Good morning. Welcome to another edition of E.W. Jackson for America. This is our Tuesday edition. Great to be with you. Hope you had a wonderful weekend. I hope you had an opportunity to get to church. I hope you caught my message if you didn't have an opportunity to get to church, or even if you did, on discipleship. Still talking about, this was the fifth message, if I'm not mistaken, on discipleship, and fourth or fifth. And it really is, folks, this is really life-changing stuff. And again, if you have not checked it out, please check it out. It'll give you some things to think about that perhaps you've never thought about with regard to your Christian walk if you are already a Christian. I often say, when we approach people or we're trying to witness to somebody, we might say, well, are you saved? I say, maybe we ought to ask people, are you a disciple of Jesus Christ? Or even if we ask first, are you saved? They say, yes, I'm saved. Say, well, are you a disciple of Jesus Christ? And they probably look at you kind of puzzled, like, what do you mean? Because Jesus makes clear that he wants us to make disciples. That's the command he gives. And then he says in John chapter 8, verse 30, he says, if you abide in my word, then are you my disciples indeed. So Jesus is indicating that there are degrees of involvement with him. And he's saying, you can claim to be my disciple, but it's not unless you're abiding in my word that you are my disciple indeed. He said, and that's when you know the truth. He said, and that's when the truth will make you free. He said, whom the Son sets free. And of course, he's indicating there that he sets people free by his word. He said, whom the Son sets free is free indeed. So I'd say I'm excited about it, and I hope you will check it out. Excuse me, I've got probably 2 or 3 more messages to preach on in this series, so it's going to be a fairly long one. Probably will end up being 7 or 8 messages in this series on discipleship. But by all means, check it out. Well, look, we got a lot to talk about today, and first of all, let me say, this is the first announcement I've made about this. As a matter of fact, what is today? Is today today is the 18th. Wow. In less than 3 months, we will be having our Stand Awards dinner. It's going to be at Cornerstone Chapel again, as it was last year. And it is going to be on Friday night, May the 16th at 7 p.m. You don't want to miss this. This is going to be a tremendous event. Now, I didn't really come prepared to do this, but I'm going to try to do it anyway. Among our honorees are Moms for Liberty, Tina Descovich, and Tiffany Justice, Walter Hoy, a long time pro-life activist, who is, again, one of those premier pro-life leaders in the black community, who has not gotten a lot of credit for the wonderful work that he's done, but he has been on the front lines for a very, very long time on the issue of life and on other issues in that regard. Robert Woodson, Bob Woodson, who has been really a real godfather of the black conservative movement. We're going to be honoring him. Kevin Freeman. You all may not know Kevin. He has several best-selling books, so a lot of people do know him. But he has really been a Christian leader in the area of financial well-being for Christians. I've read 3 of his books now. Pirate Money is one of them, where he talks about the importance of securing our funds in gold. He's not a salesman of gold or anything like that. He doesn't sell gold. He just really believes in a biblical model for how to preserve one's wealth. And he talks a lot about the consistent, steady value of gold as opposed to what paper currency does, which is fluctuate all over the place. But that's just one of the things that he's written about. He's written about our social issues and so forth, and has just been a tremendous help and consultant to a lot of people. And the Lord really sort of made me aware of him at an important meeting that I attended down in Florida. And I thought, man, this is somebody I really got to get to know more about, because I was just amazed at the things he was doing that I really had no real connection to. And of course, now I do. I'm following closely the things that he is doing, because God is doing some wonderful things with him. And the testimony he shared with me, well, at any rate, Kevin Freeman is his name. Look it up. Pirate Money, I think, is his latest best-selling book, is the one he's talking a lot about now. But he's got several other New York Times bestsellers, which is not easy to do as a conservative, frankly. Who am I leaving out? I said Kevin Freeman, Robert Woodson, Walter Hoy, Momster. Oh, and Stacy Washington. Stacy Washington is a talk show host now on Sirius. She used to be a fellow talk show host with me on American Family Radio, and she is really one of the premier voices for conservative biblical principles in America. So we've got a tremendous lineup of honorees who will be receiving the George Washington Award for taking a stand. By the way, speaking of George Washington, I'm kind of free-flowing here, okay? I'm free associating here before I get to the real topic I want to talk about. Let me... What did I say? I said I'm going to stop looking at this watch. Okay, I'm really in good shape now. I don't want to get too far along with this, but before I end up getting into my message. Okay, yesterday was President's Day. Now, apparently there's some debate going on about really what are we celebrating. We call it President's Day now because I guess we're supposed to be celebrating all presidents. We used to celebrate Abraham Lincoln's birthday and George Washington's birthday. I'm not sure whether either one of them was ever a federal holiday. I think one was. I don't know which one it was, but forgive me for that. But I always think of President's Day as celebrating George Washington and Abraham Lincoln because their birthdays are in February, and I'd never even think about any other presidents with regard to President's Day. But apparently, I guess the whole point of making it President's Day was so that we celebrate all presidents. Well, some presidents aren't worthy of celebration. They weren't even worthy of becoming president. I mean, really. Don't get me started with this one. James Buchanan, Woodrow Wilson. I know he just recently passed away, and I'll take it easy a little bit on Jimmy Carter, but let's put it this way. Jimmy Carter was a better president than James Buchanan and Woodrow Wilson. And Jimmy Carter was nothing to write home about. Andrew Johnson. Those three immediately come to mind. I could probably think of some others who weren't bad, just were do-nothing presidents who really didn't do much. But I'm not celebrating them, that's for sure. I'm celebrating. I think of President's Day. I think of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, our two greatest presidents. Somebody said to me that they thought Donald Trump might go down as great as George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. I think that's going a bit far. I just don't think the historical circumstances are there for that to be possible in my mind. You can't ever be as great a president as the first president of the United States. You just can't, not George Washington. No president can ever be as great as George Washington because George Washington set the precedent for the country and for the exercise of power and for the smooth transition of power and for handling the executive branch. I mean, nobody comes close in my view. People say that there's a contest between George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. But my personal opinion, George Washington is the greater president. Abraham Lincoln may be a close second, but he is the second in my view, not first. Because without George Washington, there would not have been a country. Abraham Lincoln certainly saved the country, and without maybe his leadership, our country could have been torn asunder forever. But nevertheless, he had a country to preserve. And he had a country to preserve in large part because of George Washington. So nobody comes close to George Washington. And because Abraham Lincoln led us through a civil war, I don't think anybody comes close to Abraham Lincoln, again, because of the circumstances in which they led. I do really believe, though, and folks, I am coming to believe that Donald Trump is going to go down as one of the greatest presidents in the history of our country. I really do. I believe that. And I think when historians look back on it, see, I'm still free flowing because I didn't plan to talk about any of this, but let's put it this way. I didn't plan to talk about what I'm talking about right now. When historians look back on it, here's what I believe they're going to conclude when they look back on it. If Jesus tarries and we have 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 50 years to reflect on the presidencies of Donald Trump, because there are two of them. I think historians will look back and say that was one of a period of the most divided we've ever seen the country, other than during the Civil War. I mean, think about this. Donald Trump won by a landslide by today's measures, a landslide, because he won the popular vote and he won the electoral college vote. But he only won the popular vote by what? 2 points, 3 points? I think 52%, 53%, something. I don't know, something like that. That's a landslide today. Why? Because we're a very divided nation. That means 48% of the people did not vote for Donald Trump. That's almost half. We are a very divided nation. And I think Donald Trump is going to be viewed as the president who stepped into the middle of that and established what the predominant direction and vision for the country would be. I don't think Donald Trump is capable of resolving the division in the country, but I think Donald Trump is capable of setting the path for the country's future and saying, well, there may be a minority of people who don't agree with this, but this is where the country should go. And when a majority agree with him, that becomes the direction of the country, and that sets the course for the nation's future. And I think people will look back on this period and say, the country could have gone either way. The country could have gone in a more socialist direction. It could have gone in a more communist direction, leftist direction, collectivist direction. But Donald Trump comes in and the country moves back to a more traditional approach, back to a more Judeo-Christian approach, back to a more traditional law and order approach, traditional family and morality approach. The former New York playboy leads the country in a more traditional direction. And while he doesn't resolve the differences that people have in the country, he establishes what kind of country we're going to be after a period of division. I really think that that's what historians will conclude about the presidency of Donald Trump. And in that sense, his presidency really is a little like Abraham Lincoln's. I mean, Abraham Lincoln's presidency, of course, much more stark because we actually got into a hot civil war. 600,000 Americans lost their lives, so it doesn't rise to that level, obviously. But I think it's similar in the sense that the country is very, very divided. And, you know, Abraham Lincoln didn't come in and change everybody's mind. He just came in and said, yeah, we know there's some people who don't agree with me, but this is the way we're going. And eventually that way won out. And I think the same is true for Donald Trump. If things go as I believe they will and hope they will, his direction will win out. And eventually the views being expressed by the Democrats today will become a distinct minority view, a footnote in history. Yeah, a lot of people were thinking this way, but it didn't succeed in carrying the country. It didn't succeed in winning the hearts and minds of the American people. So that's a perfect segue. Folks, I couldn't have done that better if I planned it. Here's what I want to talk to you about today. You all saw, I'm sure, this 60 Minutes interview with Marco Rubio, in which this journalist is suggesting to Marco Rubio, after she was asking him about J.D. Vance's speech in Europe, and J.D. Vance basically went to Europe and gave a speech to our European allies, saying, in essence, we've got to come back to freedom of speech. We can't allow the values that we have, and he called us democracies, and I'll accept it because he's with a bunch of nations and probably using an identifying term that they can all relate to. What's different about us is we are a constitutional republic. They may be democracies or whatever they want to call themselves, which is why we have a First Amendment to the Constitution and to our Constitution that enshrines in writing the freedom of speech. They do not. To my knowledge, no European country has that. Now, they all recognize, in theory at least, and that it cannot be curtailed by the government without meeting certain constitutional requirements. It must be a compelling state interest. It must be in the least drastic means. There used to be a principle that I don't hear talked about much, but there used to be no prior restraint. In other words, you can restrict someone after they have said something that, for whatever reason, should not be allowed to be said, but you cannot restrict them prior to saying it. In other words, it has to be judged in the aftermath of what they said, not before they say it. Well, this reporter, I have to check myself sometimes. I think sometimes I use the word idiot too much when I'm talking about liberals. They really are idiots, but I don't want to overdo it, because I want to use it with this woman who was doing the interview with Marco Rubio. So she asked him, she says, Margaret Brennan is the reporter's name, the journalist's name. This is on 60 Minutes. I mean, folks, I used to watch 60 Minutes because I really thought it was a news program that was going to give you a really in-depth look at some important issue or an interview with some important figure, and that you would actually elicit information. And now, I mean, it's at any rate. Oh, sorry about that. I said CBS. So I was thinking of another interview. This is Face the Nation. The same deal. I used to watch Face the Nation. I used to watch Face the Nation. I used to watch Meet the Press. Remember when Tim Russert did Meet the Press interviews? I mean, you can't trust any of this stuff now. But at any rate, so I didn't watch it, but I've seen clips from it. So Margaret Brennan says to Marco Rubio that, and in here, I'll quote it here. I want to make sure I get the quote that where she uses this expression, weaponizing freedom of speech, where she says Nazism was allowed to rise because the Nazis weaponized free speech. And you know what? I don't see the quote now, but that's what she said. I don't really need to read it, but that's what she said. Marco Rubio says, well, I have to disagree with you there, and explains to her something that any school child, any kid in middle school, if not elementary school, should know. Adolf Hitler ended all freedom of speech. There was no freedom of speech in Nazi Germany. And in fact, let's take it a step further. Before Adolf Hitler was elected chancellor he was elected chancellor by a plurality of votes. He didn't win a majority of Germans, even for chancellor. I think he won like 33, 34%, somewhere in there. But he was the highest vote getter of any party that ran. And as a result, he was appointed chancellor, which is the equivalent of prime minister under the president Hindenburg at the time. But before that election, the brown shirts, Adolf Hitler's sort of militarized followers, and they were being militarized, they were physically, violently attacking any rivals for political power. They attacked the communists. They beat them up. They intimidated them. They threatened them. And I don't think it's because they were that anti-communist, but there was no room for any other party other than the National Socialist Party. Hitler wasn't allowing that. And he wasn't allowing any expressions of anybody in disagreement with what they were promoting. Now, of course, he didn't have governmental power to do that at that time, but they used their martial resources to intimidate and frighten people so that if you dare to speak up against them, you could be hurt, maybe even lose your life. Now, folks, again, I'm a student of history. I'm not an expert on World War II history or an expert on Adolf Hitler. I have read a couple of biographies on Adolf Hitler. But does Margaret Brennan not know what I just told you? And for her to say that Adolf Hitler weaponized freedom of speech, it raises a couple of very important questions. But before I get to those important questions, let me just back up and say, Adolf Hitler did not come to power because of freedom of speech. Adolf Hitler came to power because there was no freedom of speech. Look, from the very beginning, if you had had a society, remember German culture, right? German culture, unlike American culture, is martial. It is a culture it is a warrior ethos. It isn't now, because modern Germany, I think, has tried to shed itself of all of that. But it was a warrior ethos. I mean, look, folks, the Roman Empire gave up on trying to conquer the Germans because they would just fight until you couldn't conquer them. They finally just left them alone. And they tried, I forget the number of years, but I think it's, my goodness, I don't hope, but for decades. For decades, they tried to conquer the Germans, and they couldn't do it. I mean, so they had a very, very martial culture. World War I was started by Germany, and there was a strong ethos in Germany at that time that war was good for Germany. That it was, fighting and going to war was the pathway for Germany's greatness. So Hitler comes and he inherits all of that. Thinking of himself maybe as the new Frederick the Great or whatever. He inherits all of that. But there is no history of democratic principles or ideals. Democratic, not Democrat, democratic, meaning freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom of conscience. Liberty was not something that had been practiced in German history. Not individual liberty. Now, liberty against enslavement as a nation or as a group of tribes, because that's what they were during the Roman era, as a group of tribes against those who would try to subjugate them, that's a different thing. But individual liberty, they had no concept of that. I mean, that, frankly, most of Europe didn't have any concept of that. Great Britain was further along in developing that concept as a result of the Magna Carta and conflicts that they'd been having with various wicked, tyrannical kings. But they'd gone further than anybody else in developing this notion of individual liberty, liberty as being something that belongs to each and every individual. Of course, it was perfected here in our country with the Declaration of Independence and the Revolutionary War and the establishment of the United States of America. My point in saying all that is you have to be woefully ignorant of history to believe that Hitler came to power because of freedom of speech. Or you don't really care what the history is. What you care about is what your agenda is, and you are either brainwashed into believing that what you're saying is true, or you're diabolical enough to say it because even though you know it's not true because you think it's going to help you. Now here's what I believe, and this is what I want to get to today. Here's what I believe. I don't believe that it's simply a diabolical lie, although it is a lie. But I don't think that Margaret Bennett, for example, told that lie with conscious diabolical intentions. I believe these people are brainwashed. And so it brings me to back to this issue. Here's what we're dealing with. And I hope that all of you understand this because it's going to help us to fight what we're up against. It really will. I've used this analogy many times before. We're not dealing with a political movement. We're dealing with a cult. And a cult can only be understood in spiritual terms. It can't be fully understood in intellectual terms or factual terms. It has to be understood in spiritual terms. And cults happen, I really believe, when people in the core of their being are taken over by a lie. And they're taken over by that lie because it's propounded to them sufficiently enough and in the right context enough and by enough people and with enough social pressure or what have you, that ultimately something clicks in the brain, something clicks in the being of that person. And suddenly they disconnect from reality and their new reality becomes whatever the cult says. Now just think about this with me for a second. You have some nice family, okay, and they have wonderful children. They love their children. They're raising them right, and maybe they're a Christian family. The child goes off somewhere, maybe off to college, maybe working somewhere, comes into contact with somebody who's part of a cult. Up in Boston, they had what they call the Boston Church of Christ cult. It wasn't the Church of Christ, it was a cult. It was an authority cult. I know I had some direct personal dealings with them when they absconded, literally, folks, absconded with my uncle. I am not making it up or exaggerating. My uncle lived with me, didn't live in my house, but I lived in Medford, Massachusetts. I brought my uncle up, got him an elderly housing apartment, not far from, my goodness, not 2 miles, literally, from where I lived. And my uncle would go to church with us, and he would come downstairs because he lived up on a high floor. He would come downstairs. I'd pick him up on Sunday mornings and take him to church. And, of course, I saw him during the week as well, my Uncle Charles. I was close to him. So I come by to pick him up one day, and he's not there. And I'm thinking, wow, I wonder, is he sick? Is everything okay? I ring his bell. I can't reach him. I can't reach him Monday, I can't reach him Tuesday, can't reach him Wednesday, can't reach him Thursday, can't reach him Friday. What's going on? I start to do some investigating and start to ask, his neighbors. And I mean, I'm very concerned at this point. What in the world is going on? We check his apartment, he's not there. Come to find out that the Boston Church of Christ had picked my uncle up when he was standing there waiting for me and told him a bunch of stuff about what they could do for him, what they were going to do for him, and that they loved him, and he needed to come check them out. Somehow, they coaxed him, because he's a very elderly man. I mean, at that point, he was in his 80s, They coaxed him into their car and not only took him to their big temple thing that they did at the Boston Garden on Sunday morning, but then took him back to his hometown of Chester, Pennsylvania without my knowledge or permission. Next thing I know, I look up, he's in Chester. I went to Chester to find him. They brought him back to Boston. I won't tell the rest of the story because it'll get me off my point. But I actually had to have a physical confrontation with these people to get them to cut my uncle loose. And when he finally saw me, he lit up because he had not bought into all this stuff. They grabbed him and then basically kept giving him excuses for why they didn't bring him home. And when I showed up with a group of men from my church and demanded that he be brought in front of me, he lit right up. I said, well, Uncle Charles, let's go. He said, yeah, I'm ready to go. And they just stood by and watched me walk away. I mean, so, folks, I've had, and that's not the only story I could tell you, about direct confrontation with some of these cults. But they get some kid, right? And before you know it, the parents that have raised this child, loved this child, clothed this child, fed this child, paying for this child's education, did everything they could for this child to have a healthy, wholesome, peaceful, joyful life. All of a sudden, the child's acting like the parents are the enemy. No. These are my people. Something wrong with you all. And the child doesn't want to speak to the parents. The child doesn't want to come home anymore. What happened? That cult got into that kid's head and literally flipped reality so that the cult, which is really the child's enemy, becomes the child's friend, guardian, keeper, and the parents who actually would give their lives for the child, who love this child, they're the enemy now. You got to stay away from them. Don't bother with them. They're bad news. And anybody who listening to me right now who's ever experienced this or knows anything about this, you know how this stuff is. I mean, this will just reach in and just rip your heart out, because you can see so clearly what's happening to your child, but they can't see it, and they're absolutely convinced that you are the problem, not them. And that these people that are now surrounding them and controlling them are the most wonderful people. They just love me, and they're looking out for me. And and by the way, and they're going to get me into heaven. Or whatever other nonsense they're putting in their heads. Folks, what has happened to the Democrat Party, what is happening in the left, is a cult. Now, I know they accuse those of us who support Donald Trump of being part of a cult and all that, blah, 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 blah. But it's just complete nonsense. I mean, those of you who listen to me, you know, you've heard me. I haven't agreed with Donald Trump on everything, and when I don't agree with him, I say so. They don't realize, they don't understand. We are not people who thought a certain way and suddenly Donald Trump came along and, now we think differently. Donald Trump has spoken. We think, no, we are people who thought a certain way. Donald Trump came along and began to express what was in our hearts. And we said, at last, somebody who's saying what I think. I said the same thing was true about Rush Limbaugh. They said the same thing about Rush Limbaugh. The followers of Rush Limbaugh, whatever Rush Limbaugh. No. My wife and I started listening to Rush Limbaugh in the 80s, and we would just laugh and chuckle. We said, because Rush Limbaugh was saying exactly what we were thinking. Most of the time, we would say exactly. He would make fun of Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton, and people would say it was racist, and we would just laugh. We said, but it's true. They are, Al Sharpton's a buffoon. A Jew-hating buffoon, by the way. If Al Sharpton is a reverend, I'm a Buddhist monk. If he's a Christian reverend, I'm a Buddhist monk. But you couldn't say that. Rush Limbaugh said it. And the people who they're a bunch of lemmings. They whatever Rush Limbaugh says. No, Rush Limbaugh stepped into a vacuum that people desperately needed to fill. Where is my voice? Where are my thoughts? Where the things that I'm thinking? And Rush Limbaugh said, "Hey, I think the same way." And people said, "Okay, man, I'm with you." Okay. At last, somebody say what I think. They don't understand. That's how the conservative movement is built. It's not built by people with holes in their heads, and somebody suddenly comes along and says, "Here is how you should think." And then we all go, "Yes, master, here is how we will all think from now." No, no. We had our own thoughts. We had our own ideas. We had our own approaches. And somebody comes along and gives voice to that. And we say, praise God. Okay. But you know what? With these leftists, I don't think it's that way. I think they're finding empty-headed people. And they're filling their heads with a bunch of Marxist, socialist, collectivist, racist, and I say racist because all this stuff, or racial identity stuff, sexual perversion, they're filling their head with all this stuff, all these lies about history, all this misunderstanding, really all this deception. Margaret Brennan, Hitler weaponized freedom of speech. What? I think she actually believes that. But you know what that means, folks? That makes them enemies of free speech. That makes them enemies of free speech. Because they think that if you and I are saying something that they don't agree with, that we should be silenced because that's really the best thing to do for a democracy. Because they didn't do that with Adolf Hitler, and look what happened. I mean, that is flipping reality on its head. But I think that's how they see reality, because they are cultists who have been brainwashed into seeing things in a skewed, unrealistic way that is completely divorced from reality. See, you and I would say, as conservatives and true free speech advocates, I defend the right of the people I've referred to from time to time as idiots to say what they're saying. Because look, folks, freedom of speech means nothing if it only means people are free to say whatever I agree with. Then it means nothing. It's meaningless. Because then it comes down to, well, who's in power? Who has the ability to silence the people that they don't agree with? Oh, well, I'm in power. I have the ability to silence other people I don't agree with. Okay, well, then freedom of speech means everybody who agrees with me can have as much freedom of speech as they want, and the people who don't agree with me can't be heard. I want them shut down. I want them deplatformed. But in doing so, I am representing democracy. Folks, that's cult thinking. You're not representing democracy or freedom. You're representing tyranny and totalitarianism. We are the ones who are representing true freedom. I can't think of any conservative I've ever heard, in spite of all the horrible things said about Donald Trump, say people should be censored or prevented from saying it. No. We just say they're stupid, they're wrong, we disagree with them. Here's what we believe. I mean, I'm the first to admit, Donald Trump said some things I think, oh, brother, I wish he wouldn't say that. Well, then why do you support him? Because I like the policies. I don't agree with everything he ever says, but I love the policies. Some of the things he says, I could stand up and cheer. But I love the policies that he's trying to implement. And I can distinguish between the two. But I don't say, well, anybody who disagrees with Donald Trump should be shut up. They should be silenced. They should be censored. That's contrary to who we are as a constitutional republic. As has been said by many devotees of freedom of speech Freedom of speech is precisely meant to protect the speech you don't like. Nobody's interested in protecting the speech you do like. It's the speech you don't like that must be protected. Germany wasn't functioning as a nation with freedom of speech, and Hitler came to power because they weaponized freedom. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And by the way, the left has started this. You know when I first remember it starting? With climate change. I remember Al Gore and a number of other reporters, and if you watch, you will not find anybody who disagrees with climate change on any lamestream legacy media. They do not put them on. They are censored. If you say, I don't agree with climate change, let me explain why. They say, well, there's no place for you to be heard because everybody knows climate change is an existential threat to our future and it's about to destroy the planet, and we can't have a person on saying they don't agree with that. And Al Gore is the first person I heard say explicitly, we've got to stop giving these people a platform to express their disagreement. This is just too serious. They should not be allowed to say it. And I thought, boy, that's a very dangerous road to go down. Because what you're saying is, there's some things, once I've determined what the answer is, once I've determined what the proper approach is, I don't believe that anyone who disagrees with my approach should be allowed to be heard. That's not a constitutional republic. That's not a nation that has a First Amendment. I mean, folks, every now and then, for whatever reason, it varies, the reasons vary, but every now and then I will find myself reading some of the things said about me, particularly when I ran for lieutenant governor, and even since then, some of the things that were written about me. And I just read the stuff and, I chuckle because it is so far off the mark. But you know what? Of course, I fought back and told the lamestream media they were lying, but I never said, and still don't, well, you know what? We should censor them. And they're saying things about me that are wrong, that are untrue, that I don't like. But I've never said they should be censored for that. No. Because you know what? I put myself out there to run for public office, and people who don't like me or don't agree with me have an opportunity to be heard, and they should be heard. I may not like it. It may be painful. If I don't want that, don't be in the public eye. Because, folks, our freedom operates in the context of a sinful world. We're going to have freedom of speech in heaven and in the kingdom of God, but it won't really matter. Because nobody's going to ever say anything that anybody has any problem with. Because everything we're going to be saying is in agreement with God. That's not the world we live in today. But if somebody takes it upon themselves to say, I'm going to be the person who decides if you're saying something that's not in agreement with God, that you will be censored. Watch out. That's what Adolf Hitler did. And by the way, let me add one other thing. I don't have much time left, but I got to add one other thing to this. They're still calling Donald Trump, he's a fascist, he's Hitler, he's a dictator. Folks, again, do they read any history? Do they know anything about American history, about the history of government around the world? Tyrants, dictators, totalitarian leaders don't shrink the size of government. They don't cut spending. They don't reduce taxes. They want to amass more government, more taxes, more money, more people to do their bidding. Now, who did that? Joe Biden. Who hired 80,000 IRS agents to comb through your finances and mine, trying to figure out if maybe there was a dime we owed to the federal government that we didn't pay? Joe Biden. Who's the person who said, we're going to get these IRS agents off your back and we're going to send them to the border and have them help us to catch these illegal aliens or to manage these illegal aliens and get them out of our country. In other words, I'm going to get them off your back and I'm going to put them on duty to protect you and protect the country from people who shouldn't be here. That's not what tyrants do. No, tyrants say, I've got 80,000 more IRS agents and I'm going to sick them on you. And by the way, if you're spending money on conservative causes, I'm going to know it. Remember the FBI visiting conservatives and the IRS? Remember the whole scandal of the IRS auditing conservatives and trying to take away their nonprofit status? And that's how tyrants behave, folks. And that's what Barack Obama was doing. That's what Joe Biden was doing. It's not what Donald Trump is doing. So he's firing people. Yeah, of course he's firing people because he's been elected president of the United States and he's got a right to implement his agenda. I mean, again, what is wrong with these people? If somebody is working for me and I find out they don't agree with what I'm doing, I'm going to fire them. It's not because I hate them. It's not because I want to hurt them. It's because I've got a job to do. You don't agree with the way I'm doing it. You got to go. We have hired President Trump to do a job. If you are working in the federal government and you don't agree with the job we've hired him to do, leave or be fired. That's not a tyrant. That's not a totalitarian. Folks, that's a good manager. But in cult-like thinking, oh, Donald Trump fired people. See, we told you. And yet, everybody in every walk of life knows that anywhere you work, anybody you work for, if you don't meet the standards of that job, if you don't meet their mission, if you don't meet their criteria for what you ought to be doing to help them fulfill that mission, you've got to go. Well, I've heard it from time to time in church where the pastor fires somebody from the staff and the people who in that particular church who might be against the pastor will say, the pastor's a dictator. Which is sort of the last refuge of the scoundrel who is interested in disorder and disobedience and rebellion and chaos. To call the person who's trying to put things in order, he's a dictator. It's, folks, we need to pray for these people because, people who are caught up in cults, you can't argue them out of it. They need to be deprogrammed. I've seen some of this firsthand. I've seen people have nervous breakdowns when they realize that the cult has taken advantage of them, lied to them, and used them. They have nervous breakdowns. A lot of people they literally go through post-traumatic stress syndrome. They feel guilty that they got hoodwinked, that they allowed themselves to be misled that way. We need to pray that these people come out of the cult of the Democrat Party and the cult of this leftist thinking. And it's going to be hard for them. But I think the country has rejected the cult and decided we're moving on toward being a Judeo-Christian constitutional republic. And those who were trying to lead us in a different way, we're leaving them behind. They can come with us if they want. If they don't want, they can do whatever else they want to do, move out of the country, go somewhere else, whatever they want to do. Maybe Hollywood, whatever you do what you need to do. But we're moving on. Donald Trump is leading the government that way, and you and I are going to lead the culture that way. And we're going to be one nation under God. And all the people who don't like that, go live in a nation that's one nation under the devil. Because that's the only way of living as one nation under God. That's the only way we're going to be indivisible with liberty and justice for all. That's it. Ronald Reagan said, either we are one nation under God or we are one nation gone under. And that is the truth. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. Cursed is the nation whose God is not. The left and the Democrat Party want us to be a cursed nation. I want us to be a blessed nation. The choice is very stark. It's very simple. I want the whole culture to reflect Judeo-Christian values and principles. I don't want that to be an official government policy that, the nation, you must worship God, you must be. I don't want any of that. But I want the culture, based upon the voluntary choices of the people, to be Judeo-Christian. So I would love to have an NFL commissioner, for example, who says, hey, you know what? This year, let's have a gospel concert during the NFL halftime. And everybody say, yeah, praise God. That'd be great. And people would love that. They'll enjoy that. And when people say, oh, yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, after all, we are a Judeo-Christian country, and that's something people enjoy. Rather than saying, oh, let's get the biggest diva skis we can find to shake her backside. Let's get the most nasty gangster rapper we can find and have him do some kind of gangster rap. Yeah, let's all celebrate how depraved we are. Have some rapper come on and sing about some rival of his as a pedophile. Yeah, let's do that. We're going to leave all those people behind. And they're invited to come. But if they don't want to come, then we're going to just leave them behind. America's going forward into a Judeo-Christian constitutional republic direction again, to be what the founding fathers intended us to be what made this nation of 4.25% of the population of the world, the wealthiest, most powerful, most free, highest standard of living in the history of mankind, such that everybody around the world wants to come here and wants to live here. People from around the world want to come here and want to live here. We're going back to that. And the Democrat Party can just go the way of the dinosaur or become something different. Because right now, it's a coalition of the godless. It's a coalition of the demonic. It's a coalition of the depraved. And we're not having it. It's a cult of the godless, a cult of the demonic, and a cult of the depraved. Okay? That's going to do it for today. God bless each and every one of you. Let's see. Is there anything else I need? I mentioned the dinner. Please put it on your schedule now. May the 16th, Cornerstone Chapel in Loudoun County, Virginia. We're going to have the Stand Awards dinner. I've already mentioned the honorees. I won't mention them again, but I'm very excited. We got 3 months to go. I'll tell you more about it. In fact, I should be able to tell you more about it tomorrow or Thursday. I've got a meeting on Wednesday night. By Thursday, I have a lot more detailed information for you. In the meantime, God bless each and every one of you. Wow, I'm way over. Stand up, step up, speak up, refuse to back up, because we cannot be defeated if we will not quit, because we are on God's side. God bless everybody.